Yes, I see this now in what appears to be several languages or several orthographies at the very least.
Yes.
Um, so here is Cheryl Bowman on techniques for script development. Take it away, Cheryl.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, I'll dive right in. My name is Cheryl. I love to design pretty ways of writing, and that's been a hobby of mine since I was around 10 years old. It's been my privilege to work with authors and world builders to develop scripts for their languages. And my dream is that one day I can make an impact on language revitalization, and that people of minor language groups will be empowered to make beautiful and culturally relevant writing systems for their own languages, rather than not having any other option but to borrow the orthography of trade languages. I'm grateful to be a part of the conlanging community. It's filled with fabulous people. Thank you for being here and giving me the opportunity to contribute to this growing body of skill in designing orthographies. Today, I'll go over the 5 techniques I use in my own script development. Those are, there we go, constraining your shapes, making script sketches, tips for shape generation, assigning your characters to sounds, and refining and evolving your script. Since we're focusing on the visual aspect of orthography, I want to start with some that are visually iconic and easily recognizable, even to non-linguistic enthusiasts. We have Tolkien's Elvish, cuneiform, traditional Chinese and Egyptian hieroglyphs, and lastly Gallifreyan from Doctor Who on the right. Understanding what it is that makes these memorable and identifiable will give us a leg up when we want to make our own script that visually stands on its own. I think their key factor is that you can break them down into very basic shapes. Elvish uses graceful vertical lines with the addition of a curl in some form that rests on the baseline that make a consistent core running through the text. For cuneiform, you have a long triangle or wedge shape, often used in clusters that evoke texture as much as anything else. Chinese I have interpreted as essentially sticks and boxes, but done with ornate strokes. So you get a lot of variation for how the lines are made, but the basic shapes are really simple. Gallifreyan is all crescent shapes and circles, with some lines and dots for extra markings. These illustrate what I mean by constrained shapes well, because they take one type of marking or one idea and use that as the foundational building block for their entire script. Using a constrained set of basic shapes is one of my first tips in helping someone understand how to use shapes to their best advantage in making a script. But it's not always what you're going to need or what you want for what you're doing. Egyptian hieroglyphs are an example of a writing system that is iconic, immediately recognizable, and awesome looking and cohesive, without having a basic or constrained shape set that it draws from. So while it's obviously not required, the reason I think it's important to constrain what basic shapes you use is because the shapes you choose are the flavor palette or the color palette for your script. There are scenarios where it's appropriate to use every color available to you, but it's harder to do that well. And it's harder to make something that looks cohesive if you don't use a constrained set of shapes or a limited palette. If you start really simple using your constrained sets, you'll learn how they work and how to use them. And if you know how to make shapes flow in a cohesive way, you'll be good at making the stylistic choices that interrupt that flow in a visually appealing way. You can also try constraining something other than basic shape. There are lots of ways to limit yourself to one set of ideas and spark creativity in that area. You can constrain the space that your shapes have to fit within. Maybe instead of having the 3 levels of height that English letters have, you only have 1, and you have to find a way to make the end result feel dynamic even in the limited space. Or maybe you can confine your letters to 1 line as a way of making everything look uniform. That's what I did in this vertical script, which I think lends itself to a clean look. Where the silhouette of English writing has troughs and peaks from G's and Y's and D's and K's, this has a smooth silhouette. I think it makes it look sci-fi. The other thing that I constrained in this script was the way I used my calligraphy pen. I positioned the angle of the nib at 90 degrees instead of the more standard 45, and that changed both where the weight variation fell in each stroke and the directional flow of the characters. How do you narrow down what shape or shapes you want to build your script with? Your process of developing a new writing system is going to be a lot more interesting if you start with your world building for the culture and the people of the language you created. We've talked about this a little bit already, but you'll see it's a common theme because it really is important. It's also going to make your end result feel more grounded, and you may be surprised by some of the unique options made available to you along the way. I enjoyed developing this cuneiform-inspired syllabary for author Marie Brennan as a piece of fan art for one of her book series. Its place in the story was the classic element of an ancient language used by a mysterious people that no one has been able to read, and we decided that the stylus to imprint the marks would be a reptilian scale instead of a reed used in real-world cuneiform. The end result is something that is recognizable as cuneiform inspired because I used the wedge in a similar way, but it gives it its own flavor by having the angles and slight curve of the type of stylus that I used. Those flavors that you pull from your world building are one of the things that will make your writing system come alive and feel congruent with the language you've made it for. This is my favorite example of why your world building should influence the writing system that you make. Another author friend of mine asked me to develop a writing system for characters entwining in and around each other. Each collection of symbols was meant to convey an entire word or concept, but made up of syllables writing out the word. So I made this system that functions as a kind of faux logography. I needed to build an ABGAD that was made up of shapes that could interlock with each other up to 6 times in one space. Rather than trying to come up with characters one at a time and testing every individual one against all the others, what I had to do was develop a system where I made one basic shape that I knew could fit and weave together the way I wanted. Then I could use that shape to build each syllable that would be guaranteed to function with all the others. I love the way these look and interlock, and I'm really proud of the way it works. Here's the grid I started off with, and this is what I needed to fit my basic shape into. This shaded area became my basic shape, and here it is with the glyph on top. I carefully selected the shaded triangles so that this shape could be rotated around the hexagon until everything was filled in with no overlap. The characters are designed around this shape in different ways, and there are thinner lines that move between their assigned spaces. But the majority of the area the characters take up are within their assigned space. They are guaranteed to fit without stepping on anyone else's toes and still retain their interlocking or woven nature. It's probably my favorite thing I've ever made. Another cool idea for developing an interesting set of constrained shapes for your script is to try playing around with an alphabet monogram. This is the English alphabet monogram. I didn't come up with this, but I wasn't able to find who designed this originally. It's been around for a little while. Every capital letter that we use in English can be found in this diagram. I haven't spent much time experimenting with this, but I think it's a great concept and I didn't want to leave it out. So there you go. Moving on to script sketches. They're not a refined kind of thing, so the pictures I have needed to stay dark or the lines got washed out. Sorry, they're a little bit ugly. Sketches are really great, and I will make use of one in most cases. Sometimes if I have an idea that I want to jot down that I can't work on right away, but often just because they're really useful. I'll usually get a vague idea or an overall impression of what I want a script to look like, but if I have a vision of what I want a script to look like when it's finished, it's hard for me to extrapolate individual or usable shapes from that, especially if there's supposed to be a lot of variation. Like maybe I'm envisioning a script like the one on top here with a lot of large sweeping round strokes and small marks above and below. I sketched this out so I could see what I wanted the finished product to look like. Then I could go in and extrapolate all the shapes that I needed from there, which is what you can see I did with the lower sketch. Your sketch will also show you how the shapes play off each other. You may notice that there is an element you want woven through the majority of your shapes, or that there is a special shape you want to design the rest of the characters to contrast so it stands out better. Sometimes sketches are really defined, and sometimes they're so scribbly and vague, they just give you an impression of what you want. But if you have a vision of where you want to go, I think it's always a great idea to make a sketch, even if it's really small and simple, because it's one of your references that you're going to be able to use to guide you to the end result you're aiming for. Give yourself the freedom to try lots of things in your sketch. Poke around in the art community and see all the ways you can use a simple line to communicate an edge or a silhouette or to add different textures. And experiment with the tools you have. They're probably capable of more than just their intended purpose. These were made from really loose sketches that I scrawled out to resemble the beautiful purple hanging flower wisteria, and I ended up using my brush pen to trace the sketches almost line for line. I added some line weight where I wanted to, and those are the characters now. It ended up being exactly what I wanted with very little to change, because the loose, dynamic, and organic nature of a sketch is exactly the look I needed. Shape generation. Making enough shapes and characters to fill out your whole orthography can be really tricky. I only keep a few that I've designed to put into my final product, and coming up with all those ideas is difficult, especially once you start getting into collections of more and more characters like syllabaries, or if you're more ambitious than I am, an entire logography. And if after I've made all the characters I need and I write out a sample only to find that it doesn't look as good as I thought it would, it's back to the drawing board. A few things are helpful in generating all the characters you need. Go back and look at your references, take inspiration from that. A simple but effective thing to try is taking some of the characters you like and rotating them. Using the shapes you already have will reinforce the cohesion of your script while giving you new shapes that you can use as distinct characters. Great examples in English are lowercase p, b, and d. It's the same shape, but flipped and mirrored. Something I've been using a lot lately is to combine characters. In English, lowercase m is two n's together, and w is a w, or a double v, depending on your preference. Draw anything that comes to mind. Jot down all the ideas that you have, even the ones that you don't think are going to be very good or that will make it into your final set. This is a picture of one of my ideation sheets. It is packed and filled to the brim. My usual process is to completely stuff a piece of paper with shapes and ideas, and I will go through and outline or circle the few that I really like and that I think should make the final cut with a colored pen so I can find them later. The reason I think it's great to draw all your shapes is that you have a record of what ideas you've had and how you've tried those ideas. It's common for me, if I haven't finished making my full set yet, to go back and look through my ideation sheet. I'll go, here's a character I liked, but I think there are more ways I can play with that idea I had. I can try rotating the character in a different way. I can rearrange the shapes that are there. I can try combining it with a different kind of shape than I did before. And doing that is so helpful in rounding out the kinds of characters that you have. I think it adds even another element of cohesion when you have a couple of different kinds of shapes, and then you've developed those shapes in multiple ways with each other. It's a co-evolution of the characters. Here's part of another fan syllabary I made for Marie Brennan. It's actually in the same world as the cuneiform-inspired Draconian, but this one is Mayan-inspired, at least visually. It's called Ngaru. What I did was I took my basic shapes from a small illustration in one of the books, and then I assigned consonants and vowels to each of those shapes. Then to make the syllables themselves, I merged each consonant and vowel pairing together. But I did it in more of a conceptual way. I took a lot of artistic liberties in interpreting the two merged shapes while trying to keep the general aesthetic of Mayan glyphs. There were 83 in total, so this was a great technique for making a large number of characters. It's more efficient not only because it is faster, but it's easier on the brain to compose variations than it is to invent from scratch. Use what you have to build more of what you want. Use it to show yourself all the possibilities that one set of ideas can manifest. There are so many different ways to use the shapes you've chosen, and this technique can really open that door for you. This page was a set of shapes that I drew out and found I really loved, and I thought it could be diverse enough to be used as a syllabary. But I was having trouble coming up with the rest of the characters that I needed because the new shapes I tried adding felt like they departed from the original look. So what I did was I took these characters and broke them down into their basic components, and that's how I came up with my set of basic shapes. This effectively demonstrates that you can approach the process of development from multiple ways. These basic shapes turned out looser than they would have been if my starting point had been a set of constrained shapes. They're more of a set of ideas than a set of specific shapes. One of the things I like about this approach is that it allows for all kinds of more complex syllable structures than the approach I took with Ngaru. They both use the same technique of combining single sound characters to build syllables. But I would say that Ngaru was a process of growing more complex images from two seeds, while this process is more about distilling one shape from multiple components. That's also why I think it's more conducive to working with complex syllables, because if you want to, you can distill down a consonant, 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 vowel, consonant, consonant, consonant structure into one character. You'll find lots of overlap between the two methods if you try them out, but your mindset shifts a little, and being aware of that shift is helpful. Maybe you're saying to yourself, I don't know how to make cool shapes that I like to begin with. Or maybe you've never made a writing system before and you're thinking, this seems like an intimidating process. Just start with a blank piece of paper and your pen. Draw the lines and motions that feel good to make in your hand. This picture was someone's first ever cipher, which I helped them develop. She thought it was a cool idea to take her notes in a different alphabet, but had never made one because she didn't know where to start. So we worked with doodly shapes that she loved to make in her note margins. Her starting place for an alphabet was familiar shapes she already enjoyed, which is the perfect place to start, because if you don't love making the shapes you're writing, your script isn't going to be fun to write with. So whether you're a beginner or whether you've done this several times and you want to make a new script, use shapes that you enjoy making, because it's going to be a better experience for you and your script will look better in the end. Make a writing system that is intuitive for you to produce, and that will get you your best result. Pick the shapes you assign to your phonemes carefully. This is the only piece of advice in my presentation that I think you should use in every single case. Whatever characters end up being the most frequently used in your writing system are the ones that will create the dominant look and feel of your script. Make a frequency list for your conlang. Here's one for English. Choose which shapes and characters you've made that you think best represent what you want your script to look like, and pair them appropriately. You can use this to your advantage in a couple of ways, with shapes that are a bit unique or play off the others. Use those less frequently so they don't become the dominant look and they stay a little bit more special. Be strategic with phonemes that occur together the most frequently, or with characters that are written twice if you have double letters or reduplication. And be aware of whether or not you have phonemes that are exclusively initials or terminals. You might even consider designing specific characters with those sounds in mind that will enhance the look of your script when they're placed at the beginnings or ends of words. Just to drive my point home for why I think you need to do this. Imagine you were sitting down to invent Elvish Cinderin, like this poem here, and you especially liked this round character. So you made it your most common shape. It would be a valid choice. The shape was there already, but you can see how important it is to understand the impact that choice has on your outcome. This is the final version of a script I had a hard time getting to work for me, because even though I carefully selected the best shapes to appear most frequently, it still didn't keep those flavors. I split my shapes into two categories, and this is how I finally identified my snag. The bottom section was the look that I wanted, and I had too many of the angular, almost katakana looking shapes mixed in. Even though they were assigned to lower frequency letters, there were enough of them that their shapes were still too common. So I nixed a bunch of those and modeled some more off the rounder type. That example could have fit under refining, but I wanted this last section to focus on how you can move forward. At what point do you decide that your script is finished? You can leave it alone after you've assigned everything, but I would encourage you to see how far you can take it. I set out to make a script that I thought looked unique with the most basic of shapes, dots and lines, and this is what I got. I more or less liked these shapes, but I was convinced that they were not living up to their potential in this form. So I pushed it in two different directions. For the first, I tried a cursive form with lots of loops and continuous motion. For the second, I broke out my calligraphy pen again. How can you not? And I reimagined the strokes in my new medium. This triplet of alphabets was my greatest lesson in pushing the boundaries of my designs, particularly with the third variation, because I realized after the fact the reason it looked so alive to me was that I had artificially given it a history. If I want to make lots of history for my script and drastically age it through multiple eras, my go-to strategy is to scribble out sample text, fast and messy. And that is a quick way to break down carefully structured or potentially complex writing into a more organic form. This is the draconian script that started out with the scale-stamped cuneiform styled syllables. I wish I had a better functional transition here from syllabary to alphabet, but I don't. So this text spells the name Imalki. The top two lines are the syllabary made first with a stylus, then with a brush, and the bottom three are the alphabet, increasingly corrupted and simplified. Refining this script, which I named Garden Party, actually meant taking away some of my original constraints. The characters were inspired by newly germinated plants, but couldn't quite hit that mark until I got rid of the uniform baseline and other height constraints. So let your ideas flourish. Use basic shapes creatively. Sketch out every idea that comes to mind. Take what you have and modify it to make more of what you like. And remember how much one shape can influence your whole design. These are some things I've learned from my experiences so far, and I'm convinced that the more we learn and share with each other, the more we'll all be equipped to make the best looking scripts we're capable of. I hope this helps you bring a little more beauty to your world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. That was awesome. I was trying to answer a few emails while I was listening there, and I was like, oh, I've got to go back and watch that part. I've got to go back and watch that part.
It's very visual.
But I mean, right off the bat, you had me that you want to help revitalize various indigenous languages and allow them to not just adapt a romanization, but have their own. I think Sai had a question that they wanted to ask. Sai, do you want to unmute there?
Hey, so first off, your scripts are both gorgeous and structurally clever. So I'm very impressed, and I'm reminded of Trent Person. Have you tried making a nonlinear or otherwise systemically unusual script, or perhaps a logography?
I have played around with a couple of different things. When you say nonlinear, I assume you mean like writing in straight lines across the page. Is that what you meant? Because I have experimented with that a little bit.
By nonlinear, well, I mean the kind that I made, which is essentially if you think of most scripts, they can be put in a straight line without really breaking anything, whereas a nonlinear one would somehow be two-dimensional in some inherent way.
Yeah. I have tried a couple of things. I haven't made great progress. One of the things that I love in working with other people is like my writer friend I made the entwining characters for. She just writes stuff. She's very much an author of through discovery, like Brian was talking about. So she'll just write something. She had in one draft a set of maps with characters that moved and floated all over the page, and it was all very ambiguous, and I was like, I can totally figure out how to somehow structure this even while making it look like it's not structured, but I haven't finished that, so I don't have any explanation for you, but there's a lot of very cool stuff to try out and play with.
A YouTube question from George Corley. There are some conlangers that try to realistically derive characters from pictograms. Do you ever try to reverse engineer an etymology from a logographic script?
Ooh, I haven't tried that. That would be very interesting. Not something that I've done, but if you end up finding my Twitter linked with this video when it's put out, please send your experiments to me, because I would very much love to see it.
Feel free to give the shout out on your Twitter handle.
Oh, okay. My Twitter is at fantasticalskirt1. It was supposed to be fantastical scripts, but it was too long.
A question from John Chiata. I'd like to know Cheryl's opinion of the circle splash secretion writing system from the Arrival movie.
Oh, I'm not answering questions very well today. I would love to talk about that. I have not watched that movie yet because I know I very much want to, but there's a friend who wanted to watch it with me, so I've put off watching that. I can't wait to watch it and figure and see how it works, because I've seen stills from the movie and it looks glorious. No spoilers, no spoilers.
No spoilers. I think you would probably find a very even split of conlangers who love it and conlangers who hate it, for probably almost the exact same reasons.
I can't wait. Thank you.
Yes, I think I did say twiddler, YouTube.
Twiddler.
Slip of the tongue.
One more thing I'll bring up about aging your script. So while I was drafting this, Native Lang put out a delightful video on YouTube talking about how it was when the rest of the world was deriving Egyptian hieroglyphs into their respective alphabets. Egypt was going and making theirs more complex. So while the example I gave of aging your script was a method of breaking it down and making it simpler, that's not the only way you have to go if you want it to be naturalistic. And there's lots of really wonderful things to add and discover in your writing system if you want to age it in that way as well.
I definitely appreciated all the very practical advice that was laid out along with the personal examples. And there's a few requests that if you have the time to post a Twitter thread at some point, that people would love to see the different steps of different scripts that you've already designed.
Oh, that's a lovely idea. Thank you. I'll get on that.
Matt Pearson is just sharing that Jessica Kuhn was his student, and was the consultant for Arrival. I didn't realize Jessica was your student, Matt. She didn't get to work on the script at all. She just got to work on some of the what would a linguist do in this point. And I think I noted earlier that the only piece of artwork that Jessica contributed to the film was it was actually her whiteboard in the back of the tent with some actual linguistic structures on it. But thank you very much, Cheryl. You're getting a lot of praise on the YouTube channel for everything you contributed. So definitely recommend you pop over to that at some point and check it out.
Thank you for having me. And thank you all for coming and listening. That was so kind. It was my pleasure.